There is a weird lie. High pressure environments tell us keep moving, don't feel it, just solve the next problem. But unprocessed grief does not disappear, it just shows up later as burnout, sharp edges, quiet resentment, or a team that can't trust each other anymore. And now, with AI speeding everything up, we are not just moving fast, we are moving fast while emotionally behind. Welcome back to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, where we keep mental health practical, human, and real for everyday life and work. I'm Yusuf, and today I'm joined by Angela Fusaro, an emergency medicine physician and startup founder who's lived inside high stake environments where outcomes don't always match the plan. We're talking about grief and gratitude, not as nice ideas, but as two emotions that, when processed honestly, can change how we lead, how we show up under pressure, and how we stay human in an AI accelerated world. With that, I welcome my guest, Dr. Angela, to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. That was a beautiful story. I imagine you've had your share of grief and gratitude.
Yeah. So, Angela, before we go into frameworks or teams, just human to human, what was the moment you realized, oh, grief isn't only personal, it is showing up everywhere, including work?
Yeah. Well, you highlighted some of this in the introduction, but I have been an emergency medicine physician for, over 15 years, and I transitioned away from that work to start a digital health company. So I was a founding CEO, and then all of that, I honestly kind of walked through those experiences blind to grief until I had a very personal loss. And I unexpectedly had a death in my family. And I think it was when I realized what an impact that experience had on me, not just in processing sadness but also like its impact on my identity and my motivation and I then became very attuned to how often that's showing up in professional spaces because although um, we suffer through loss in professional capacity, we don't really call it that, and we don't ever give language to those losses, and so because that's part of the challenge that we don't give it language, but also um, we don't really have traditional process for how to move through it, and so I think it took me having this very, traumatic personal loss to then see how prevalent it was in professional settings.
Hmm. Yeah, and I appreciate you naming that because so many people are carrying something heavy while still performing like nothing happened.
Yeah, I think for me, that was maybe the first step was realizing that all work is grief work. Everything that we are struggling with or battling in a professional capacity, you really can trace it back to some grief. And I'd even take it a step further to say it's not just the loss, but it's the unprocessed change. It's the transition that we haven't really acknowledged its complexity. We haven't given language to it, and so because of that, all of the unsavory behaviors that show up in our professional lives, whether that's burnout, whether it's lack of motivation, teams are just not having the same outcomes that they once had. A lot of that can be traced back to grief, but we never call it that.
Yeah. And Dr. Angela, why do you think people get wrong? W- what do you think people get wrong about grief and gratitude in high performance spaces?
Yeah, beyond first not acknowledging it, I think that's the big one is that we don't really we don't see acknowledging grief and loss as fundamental, and we can we see that play out in a lot of different ways. Teams will have an unexpected outcome, or someone gets riffed, and there is no process for even just acknowledging that first, it's like you just move on to the next project, you just fill in the gap for that teammate's responsibility. So I think the first part that we get wrong is we don't really acknowledge it both with words, and we don't create space to process it. I think another thing that I've seen that's challenging is for teams that do acknowledge loss or grief, uh, one of the ways that they tend to try to address it is by moving as quickly as possible through it, well, by using like gratitude as an anecdote to grief. And uh, while I do think that gratitude is a huge component of what stabilizes a person who's feeling loss, if you move too quickly from one to the other, it really invalidates that person's experience. And so, I think there is, like with so many things in life, there's this balance where you want to be able to validate that person has, a very legitimate loss, that there's nothing to fix about it, but acknowledge it and validate it. Um, and do that without trying to replace it to get quickly to a place where it's comfortable and they can go back to performing. And so, I think that's the other thing I've seen is that it's really about being able to hold grief and gratitude at the same time and not necessarily trying to get rid of the grief and the loss, but by, praising them or, fixing their problem.
Yeah, that is such an important distinction. Gratitude as a truth versus gratitude as a mask. And when grief is denied, it doesn't vanish, it just leaks into the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think especially in places where, again, my work has been both in emergency medicine and then as like a startup founder, and those are obviously different situations with different stakes, but both are high pressure environments where there's a high degree of ambiguity. And, that that miss of not creating a process or a space to process grief really gets accelerated and compounded when you're talking about high pressure environments and environments of ambiguity. And I think that,
Right.
yeah.
Dr. Angela, you have said that something that really cut cut through. Teams often struggle less because of poor strategy and more because of what goes unacknowledged afterward. Can you walk us through that? What does unacknowledged aftermath look like?
Yeah, and I think it really depends on what the culture was before. I think that unacknowledged grief can show up in different ways. Uh, a lot of times it shows up as burnout, and or what we think is someone is overwhelmed with either the quantity of work or, we interpret that this disengagement, this feeling of sort of marginalization or they're disenfranchised, right? They're disenfranchised from their team, and we interpret that as them being overwhelmed with their responsibility or not having some tactical skill to be able to perform. But the truth is just that they are in a space where it's very hard to find the same motivation to engage and to participate. And that is what I have seen as one of the most common ways. The behavior can vary, right? Sometimes it's not burnout and disengagement, but but underneath it, it's that lack of motivation. It's sort of a reassessment. It's a reassessment period of what is important and is my role here really important? I think after some loss, when teams just move on, it's very difficult to not feel replaceable because what it looks like is we had this tremendous suffering. I'm still suffering, but outside, no one seems to see that, or if they do, they're not acknowledging it, and the train just keeps going. And so we internally start to question, well, am I really fundamental to this process? Is this really important to me still? And there's this landslide of self-reflection and disengagement that happens if we don't acknowledge the loss first.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That right there is the sweet spot, naming what happened without forcing an emotional performance. It's not therapy, I think It is just a basic human accounting.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's great that you, framed it that way, that it's not therapy. Uh, I it is not, meant to be performative. It's not meant to be, uh, divulgent in a way that would be professionally inappropriate, but it is a pause of acknowledgement. Uh, and so I think there's a difference between creating space where people feel comfortable enough to at least acknowledge where they're at in their own words, on their own terms, versus what you were saying, which is um, inquiring and almost putting them on the defensive to answer about how they're doing. And so I think that is something to really be cognizant of, which is creating a safe space as a leader could be very few words. It's just, I see you, I can tell this is hard. And maybe there's nothing more than that. And you're not even asking that person to divulge any additional information, but it's letting them know that you at least can acknowledge this is an important moment and whatever they're feeling is valid.
Yeah, that makes sense. In a real world, when grief and disappointment go unnamed, how does it show up in communication and trust? What are the symptoms leaders usually misread?
I think I think one of the things that I have seen, um, as a leader is the first thing is whatever behavior we're seeing or whatever words we're hearing, that's really the tip of the iceberg. And
Okay.
underneath all of that is some way more complicated story, which quite frankly, with the speed of the world, we're probably never going to have the time, and maybe it's not even appropriate for us to fully understand what's underneath that, for that other individual. But my challenge, if you will, to myself and as a leader is to always keep that top of mind, that whatever behavior I'm seeing, right? So whether it's, um, this person that I've worked with is now more impatient, again, they're less motivated, they're making more mistakes, like the outcomes are just deviating from the expectation of the job. I I'm not, I just wanna, like, as a side say, I'm not justifying that we adjust expectations. Like, I work in, situations where expectations are extremely high and they're uncompromising, right, for good reason. But I think there's a way to have that professional standard stay high and uncompromised while still acknowledging that whatever behavior you're witnessing, it is just the tip of the iceberg. It is, in fact, just that is a symptom of something much deeper. And as leaders, we don't have all
Mhm.
the time to really understand the full story. And so perhaps the most important thing we can do is just validate the importance of whatever's going on for that other person. And so I try to remind myself of that is I don't know have the full picture. I'm never going to have the full picture. That's not really my role as a leader. My role as a leader is to let that other person understand that I understand I don't have the full picture.
Hmm. Angela, you created the healing protocol. Tell us about it in plain language.
Uh yeah, so I think uh being a physician, I I've taken an oath to do no harm. um
Mhm.
and the the premise of a healing protocol for something of this nature is along those lines, right? I want to first be able to interact with people, communicate with my team in a way that I'm not furthering the emotional challenges that they're feeling. And so, in the to take that, I guess, a step beyond, it's really about giving leaders a language for what happened, a language and a bit of a playbook for what happens when things don't go as planned. And I think it's important to acknowledge first that things hardly ever go as planned. I, unrelated to this work, I have built a community um, around motherhood, and one of our core principles is essentially everyone on this journey of motherhood has some pretty significant deviation from expectation. So, and I believe that to be true as well in the startup world, in emergency medicine. Almost every one of us has had multiple plans that don't go uh, accordingly. And so, just first being able to acknowledge you're going to have missed goals, failed projects, there's going to be pivots. We are not going to just move on, but we are going to move forward in a more intentional way. And so, first is about giving language, giving space for the acknowledgement, and it's acknowledging the loss, being able to continue to notice who's still showing up. And that's a part of the appreciation and the gratitude part. So it's not performative praise, but really being able to call out someone's effort in the midst of that loss. And then, collectively moving forward without denial.
Mm. I love that. It is short, it is honest, not dramatic, and just true. Because teams don't need more motivation, they need meaning and repair. And how we have this extra layer.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to acknowledge that y- there is a difference between, because I think that second part sometimes gets a little bit skewed, the part where you're acknowledging who's there and the effort that they're making. I feel compelled to emphasize that it's not a performative uh, praise, because I do think you live in a culture where we're rewarded for toxic positivity, especially in professional settings. So you're not we don't want we do want people to have authentic hope and optimism for the future, but not by burying the reality of what was lost. And so when I say, still acknowledge the work that's being done, it's more about really seeing effort, like decoupling that from the outcome, seeing the effort so that that person can feel internally validated for the effort they're still making. It's not so that they can perform in a way that makes me feel more comfortable. I think really calling attention to our tendency as a humanity right now with toxic positivity, like there is a role for sadness, like that's part of the healing protocol, is to acknowledge the loss. So, to not let those things crowd each other out.
Yeah. Dr. Angela, if people want to learn more about you or just want to connect with you, where can they find you?
I would say, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've started giving some keynotes and workshops around the country related to these topics, and I would love to continue the conversation there. So please connect with me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And to everyone listening, all these links are in the show notes, so just go and check those out.
Thank you so much, Yusuf.
Dr. Angela, is there any last message that you want to leave us with?
I think ev going back to how we started, our time together, acknowledging that all of us, everyone listening um, to this podcast, that we all are grieving something, and there is power in that loss, and we can harness that power if we acknowledge it both personally, and within our teams. And so I would love to see all of us, myself included, I work on this every day, um, give ourselves time to name it, to sit with it, and to really allow it to work for us, because we're all grieving. We're all grieving something.
Thank you so much for bringing this kind of grounded honesty, Angela. No platitudes, just reality and tools.
Thank you.
And to everyone listening, if this episode gave language to something you have been carrying, follow healthy mind, healthy life. Not because we are trying to fix you, but because you deserve conversation that don't rush your humanity. Share this with someone in a high pressure season. And if you are that someone, take a breath. You don't have to earn your worth by pushing through pain in silence. I'm Yusuf, and I'll see you in the next episode.